I picked up one of these books when I first moved to Bozeman about 6 months ago from the shop that must have been left over from a previous seminar.
He makes some extra copies just to sell.
I took it down to Kinko's, and for like a very nominal fee, I had them bind it with a plastic, colored plastic back, clear plastic front, and oversized binding so it was easy to flip. It was worth that little extra effort. The book has been very valuable.
I took mine home and punched holes in it and put it in a 3-ring binder.
Hopefully I'll have that all in a book form, and all the drawings will be done pictorially with a camera. And
A lot of people waiting for that.
You're going to retire rich man.
oh, fat chance. I don't think so.
What are we tying now?
George's brown stonefly. I'm going to run the slides on here. I just stuck a hook in there, and I'll pull it down and turn this off, put a pair of glasses on, and I'll go through that pretty quick. Let's see what that. Okay, good. Yeah. Okay. Here's the thing about here. Okay, George's brownstone. The technique we're talking about here is weaving. You know how to tie tail fibers in. This is looking right down on the hook, and what you do to do the weave is you tie a strand of brown on one side and a strand of tan on the other side, or whatever color you want to make. Cover the body with a wrap of 1 ply of the lighter color, so that if you have something that shows through, you won't see a color that you don't want. It'll look nice and neat. Then I take and cut the tying thread off. Make a real quick whip or a couple half hitches. Cut the tying thread off. Set your bobbin down so that when you pick it up later on, you'll be able to pick it up and the thread will be out and it'll be real easy, because you have to hold. This is one of those flies you need 3 hands until you get a feel for it. But I got a little trick that eliminates the 3rd hand. The weaving technique is pretty simple. Your fingers never leave your hand. No, seriously. The brown never goes. You always keep the brown in your left hand. You always keep the tan in your right hand. And what you're going to do is you're going to go over the top with the brown, and you'll go underneath with the tan. And it's just, brown, tan, brown, tan, brown, tan, until you end up with a woven type of thing. Okay. Now the tan is underneath. The brown is going to go back over the top. And when you see me do it, you say, well, God, that's easy. I can do that, if you haven't done it. But it's a nice, easy technique. You like the backlighting, Jane?
Yeah.
Okay. But that's the whole thing. And it's just a simple thing. It's just a matter of, you never take the one color that's in your left hand, you never take it out of your hand, and the same thing with your right naturally, but it's just going back and forth over the top until finally you're finished. Now, George Anderson ties a knot. But I find that sometimes that knot causes problems. So I hate a George's brown stone where you can twist it all around the hook. So I use some of the Sandy Pitten Ridges glue, and before I do it, I just put a little shot of that down across the top. And then as I weave this thing forward, I can let this thing go when I get up front, because that super glue is going to hold it there. And I've got, right where I want to be. This is a loop mark with a fur that's stuck in it. You notice the guard hairs? Now this I cut off to hide, because I want the guard hairs sticking out beyond. Notice on the left-hand side how the guard hairs protrude from. Here's the mass of fur right in here. A little bit more on the outside, favoring the guard hairs. Then I'll twist this up into a chenille, and it's wound on just the same way we did the other. Okay. Then what I do is I pull the whole bunch of stuff up so it's on the dorsal or top side of the fly, and then wind a few more turns back. That way it gives me that nice effect where that clump of stuff that animates the fly is under fur and the guard hairs, they sort of shake and quiver and maybe make that thing look live. You can add rubber legs. Round rubber is great. It doesn't caulk like the square rubber does. It's real nice to tie in. And you can tie that in and then put that same bunch of fur in front, and a very good fly. Eric guided quite a bit last year on the big hole on the Jefferson and the Ruby, and found out, Very good fly. The belly, naturally, you have the, this is why the under wrappings, I was telling you, use the same color to cover the whole tie-in as your lighter color will be. And that way, if you have a little thing that shows through, you don't see it because it's just all the same color yarn. Okay, while we're on the slides, maybe we'll run through these and we'll do a couple of times. These are Gamera scuds. And it seems like there's always females that have eggs. These black bunch of stuff here, those are eggs, they're on the belly. And trout love them. I tie a scud pattern. This is a piece of plastic that's been cut with a razor blade. Hackle fibers dyed, whatever color you want them. This is going to be a spinning loop. There's a piece of mono for a rib. This is seal fur, and it's put in between the loop and spun. Very shaggy. Very shaggy. And it's all pulled down, the long fibers you can break off. These are the little swimmerettes underneath. The shell back is brought over the top. The monofilament puts the little segments in the top of your case. You take your dubbing needle and pluck out some more swimmerettes to get a nice even distribution of fibers on the belly or side of your hook. And the finished fly should look something like that. There's a multi-mix of seal fur of different colors. You notice there's a piece of red, there's some yellows and olives and creams and everything in there. I like a variegated color because most things in life are a combination of colors rather than one solid color.
You tie that on a humpy hook or a...
Yeah, I put a little bend in the hook. You can use a shrimp hook that they sell. Everybody makes one now. Daiichi, Dairiki, Tiemco all make curved shank hooks as well as partridge. This is going to be a crest bug. The crest bug is a little flattened thing, and I use a little different technique in tying this, and it's a real simple type of tie. This is a double thread again with pine squirrel and some dun colored seal fur mixed in, blended together in a blender and wound on, and you keep pulling back, and this is a very small fly, and I'm trimming the top flat, the bottom flat, so that the finished fly will have a flattened type of shape. And I go over the top of the back end of this thing and I take a felt tip marker and blacken the thing with little dots, and notice the shape, how flat it is, and the little black dots that give the modeling of the bug on the top. So it's a nice little easy pattern to tie, and it works on a lot of streams. Even though this bug isn't in there, they take it. It must look like something edible.
With regard to technique, you got some very good press in one of the fly tying manuals for a leech pattern, which was done with marabou but looked like it was equally flattened. Is that how you tie that leech?
No.
Oh,
Oh, one of them, yes. One of them, yes. And what they are emu plumes. The it's a long feather at the base of a emu's big feather, and they're real long, and they call them marabou hackle. And they're not readily available anymore, so I discontinued the fly. It was a good pattern. It was tied the same way. You wind it on like you were going to tie a bivisible, trim the top and the bottom flat, and leave it stick out the side. And what happens, if you've ever seen a real live leech, is in the water they'll be real short and stubby and flat, and then they'll stretch out where they look like an angleworm, and they locomote this way. So that this thing tied flat looks short and stubby. And when you pull it through the water, those long fibers from the marabou hackle will go like this, and it'll get to be a little longer, thinner fly. And I put a marabou tail in it also, so it would blend right back in the tail and give the illusion of a longer fly, and again, animating the fly. Okay. This is I just threw this in for a pattern, fish a bighorn. This is one of our scud patterns that we like. Real simple, little red tail, copper wire. Take some orange art foam or ace bandage with an orange felt tip marker, and a technique here for covering up on sight. To end a wire right at the eye is terrible. It's a real hard thing to do. So what you do is you end a wire right here, cut it off, bury it down in there, and then dub over the top of it so that you can't tell where the ribbing ended. So what you're doing is covering up trash. You know, some things are hard to tie. That's pretty big diameter copper wire, so covering it up. But this, when I guided over on a bighorn for about 4 or 5 years, I guess I got over 100 trips on a bighorn alone. This was one of our #1 flies. And it still works. Every time I go over there, I try it out, and it still catches fish. And the dubbing is, I think it's listed down there, and we use a little bit of Antron, a little bit of orange dyed rabbit, and some of this glow bug yarn, chopped up and all thrown in a blender. There's one of the nice rainbows I picked up one day. You see that little scud hanging in the corner of his mouth? That was a nice fish. He's almost 6 pounds, but just immense girth on him. Real pretty job. Okay, that's something else.
Sculpin. Is that a sculpin?
Yeah, that is. That sure is. That sure is. How are we doing time-wise? 52 minutes. We will do this. Let me see. We may be just a hair behind scud and kiwi. Yeah, and that'll go fast because I've got some of that's already partially tied, so that'll work out real good. Okay, George's brown stone, the weaving operation is basically what we're interested in all times. A tail end for just a standard pattern just calls for brown hackle. Like I say, the rubber pattern is, you know, basically the same thing. It's just a method of tying on the. When you're tying a pattern you're going to weave in, you want the body length pretty much the same. I run the feather for the tail all the way up, and I leave considerable room in there for your head, because if you don't, this one you can get into a lot of trouble, especially if you're tying any at all with rubber, because it gets to be kind of bulky material, and you're going to end up having problems if you don't. And these are tied in on each side of the hook. And I'm going to put some super glue on that before I start to weave. And there's a little piece of this thing here, and I'm just going to pull off one of the plies. And all this does is, during the weaving operation, is something, if your spacing isn't just quite perfect, you don't see some color showing through that you don't want to show through. You can do the same. You can put this stuff over lead, but make sure your lead has a nice thing. And I like an abrupt shoulder to end this thing too. Now here I'm going to put a little fast whip finish on it by hand and take my tying thread off of there. But I'm going to put this bobbin down where I can pick it up real easy, and the thread sticking out, and it's ready to go. And here's the part of the weaving that I can cut these down a little shorter. That long. Okay, this is our. This thing always clogs up on me. Okay, let's see if that's right. I can see a big globule of that stuff in there right now. I'm going to take a hit. Ah, there it is. Okay. Don't put an excessive amount on, but just go over the top of this thing and run a little bit of super glue on it, so that when you start weaving now, you're not going to run into any problems, and it's going to hold your thing in place. So what you do is you go over the top of the dark, and you go underneath with the light, over the top, and just keep going on. Go real slow so you can see what I'm doing. Underneath with a light color belly, over top of the dark, underneath, over top. Actually,
to make the color break right at the middle.
I beg your pardon?
I'm sorry. Do you strive to make the color break right at the middle along the sides?
You try, yeah, and I've done a reasonably good job so far. Now let's see if that stuff will hold here. Now the back end is holding all right, but that front. Now, to tie this thing off, this is where I said you almost need 3 hands. You're going to have your bobbin so that you pick it up and it's, you know, readily available. I'll get in and I'll tie off the light colored, and depending on which one you want to work on first, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference. Okay. When you tie a bunch of stuff, if you're working with chenille, I have a card, here it is, here, and I just cut steps into it, and these are just inches. And I write down a little card in every bag I do, and like for this, if I need a certain length of thing for a size 8 or whatever I'm tying, I'll look on my little card and it says I need 8 inches, so I'll take the 4-inch part and I'll wrap it around here and take a razor blade and zap, and I've got a whole gang of 8-inch pieces, okay? Because I've doubled it and I'm only cutting it once. If you want 4-inch pieces, you'd cut it here and here, and you'd have all 4-inch. But it's just a little gadget that, you know, it helps me quite a bit in handling the materials. Okay, fur. This is muskrat that has guard hairs and it's still on the skin. I kind of like it. I just like the way that it looks. To make your tying loop, just wind right over top of itself. Stick that in your vise. Throw a half hitch in here because this is a place where you bump your thread or bump your bobbin quite a bit, I think. A dab of varnish there and a little bit of varnish here, and I want guard hairs and I want the under fur also. You got one little bunch in there, so you can stick that thing out. And if you want a little more than that, depending on how big a head you want, and you know, this one here, I've allowed enough space here that I can put just a hair more in there. And once it's in between the threads, you can pull them up tight, and you can separate this off so that you distribute the thread reasonably, you know, even through the piece of material that you have. You notice that? Okay. Now it's just a matter of spinning. Again, if you dampen your fingers, the spinning is pretty easy. Now, every turn you make, reach up forward and pull it forward so you're pulling all the, you don't want to bind these hairs down. If the ends are nice and sticking back and, you know, you get a little bit more action out of your fly. And again, this is the final tie off. I'm inner or overwrapping that thread. I'm locking it in place. Okay, cut this in. And I want, rather than have it distributed all around there like that, I like to, personally, I like without the rubber legs. I like the rubber legs too, but if I'm tying it without, I pull all the fur up for both of them. I'll pull it up on top and I'll make a little longer, bigger head on this thing too, that where I can keep that. Notice how that fur stays up on the top of that, clumped up there a little bit more than rather than being all around the hook. We're about 2 flies behind, but one of them it's part of the tying is pretty self-explanatory, so I'm going to skip through some of that, and what I'm going to concentrate on spinning and flaring hair. So I've got the body of the thing tied, a little bit about how to tie the fur wing, but that'll go rather quick, you'll see when we get started on it, so don't worry about that. Pass it around. We'll take a little lunch break here then. How'd that be? And we'll see you in a little bit. I don't know what I have on that thing. They have the deer hair and that thing, and those will go pretty quick. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, okay, that'll take care of that last thing there. Alrighty. Okay, let's see.
That's her name, Janet? There's, both of them are standing right out there, both of our missing members.
Okay.
Let the games begin.
Good.
What we're waiting now, what was that brand of spar varnish you used?
Man of War.
Yeah.
Let's see here. I'll show it to you. Remind me when we're finished. I got a brand new can of it.
Okay.
I bought it down at the paint pot. It's the only place I know that handles it. If you do any fly rod making, it'd be a good varnish to use on your wrapping, because that's what Winston does. And
Where did you say you buy it?
paint pot down at the other far end of town. It's pretty close to the what is that? The Bozeman Hotel down there. It's down a couple blocks past that on that same side.
Where'd you buy that 8,000 wire?
Oh, you can get that almost any craft store.
Okay.
Yeah, in fact,
Also Notion stores. Where they
Yeah,
have
right.
good, sewing supplies, that's where I get
yeah,
mine.
this is
Sewing?
59 cents a spool of this stuff, you know. And I bought a whole crapper full of it. And I
For
use it so
beadwork.
much on all the pheasant tails. Like I was showing you, know, coming up and doubling the thorax with it. Boy, is
You
that
gotta use
slick
your
and fast.
imagination
You start
when you're
tying
looking
those
around for
things, and if you
materials.
start looking at the clock when you're tying, you say, God, I'm tying a lot of flies.
Oh, yeah, I did that and I got
You're
tired
waiting
of it.
and,
I-
you know,
I just-
using it as a rib, and that's
I,
one material you don't
so
have to
then I went
handle.
into,
Just
to sewing stores, big city sewing stores that got all sorts of weird
I've seen some
supplies.
people that'll take their threads and stuff and put them on the bobbins. Or their wire, put it on the bobbins. I think they're using ones that are all scarred up from,
yeah, I was gonna say, if you have a bobbin you don't like,
yeah.
yeah,
Not
that'd
gonna do
be-
much for the bobbins.
yeah, no, that would do a real nasty job real fast.
Must be enameled.
Yeah.
Rather than.
That's strange.
Okay,
Never heard
I'm
of
gonna tie a kiwi and a zonker,
it.
and then we'll start on dry flies, and I'll go a little quicker. Some of these bigger flies take a little bit more time. This is on the kiwi is basically on tying a hair wing. I've got the bodies already made, so that'll speed up a little bit there. And in fact, there's the bodies all ready to put the wings on, and it's basically a hair spinning operation. So let's see where we were on here.
That's the third tray,
Okay,
ready to go.
good.
You've got about 6 more on that
Okay, I'll put it down here so it's in the same position. Yeah, okay, go ahead.
and do
Hopper.
slides.
Okay, sculpin. This is a shot of a sculpin shot in the water so that his fins are all exposed like they normally look. Look at the size of that head when you put those trimmed deer heads or wool heads or whatever you're tying on your minnow imitations. You can see why that big head makes them look a little bit more lifelike. There are little teeny ones, you know, this one here, not very big. And then here's one, he came out of about a 3.5 pound trout. He didn't have it totally digested. He just gorged it. He just popped it out of his mouth, big old male brown. And he hadn't swallowed all the way. I caught him, we got him in a boat, and he popped it out and it fell in the bottom of the boat. So we took a picture of it. Isn't that, you know, is that big or is that big? You know, so they do eat, you know, whatever they can get their mouth on. This is a ling minnow. In Clark Canyon, in our Beaverhead drainage, we have a lot of ling. And this is a ling minnow. And unlike the finny rayed stone catfish or bullhead or sculpin, they make a real great meal because they're so soft and palatable, I guess, for the trout. They swallow. Yeah, they
They're real
swallow them anyway.
slimy too.
So you can see where maybe,
They're
you
called
know,
lawyers.
a woolly bugger or a kiwi or something of that nature might do a good job of imitating these things. This is starting the body. I'm not going to tie the body. I have them made and I have them epoxy. And I'm going to put the wing on that because it's pretty simple. I put a thread wrapping, and right here up at the head of the fly, right where I start, I take all my hooks, and for every size I tie, and I think I have it on the sheet, I allow a certain amount of space in here just to stack the hair, okay? And on, like on a number 4, I believe it's something like 5/16 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch or something. I don't remember unless I look. But I just lay them down on a piece of paper that has, you know, a 1/4 inch marking, and I'll slide the hooks over, and I'll take a felt tip marker pen, sharp point, put a little mark. You can see part of the black there, I think, if you look real close. And I leave enough space here and here so that when I put the Mylar tubing over top, I can tie it down easy. When you pull the cord out inside the Mylar tubing, I always take a piece about 2 feet long, and you grab the cord and you can take the cord out of about 2 feet of it all in one swipe rather than doing each piece individually. I tie them down using some fluorescent red. I actually use this color when I tie the fly. Whitlock was telling me one day that he says, this red represents the inside of the gills, that little red you see up in the gills, and this is the anal spot. So we'll go along with him.
Anatomically correct.
Right, it was so easy that I thought, you know, we can't miss. Wait a minute, push this down so I can get up on screen. There we go. Okay, and then I take the back end here and cover that last cutting up with thread. Then epoxy the whole thing. And I've been using the DevCon. If I have a lot of bodies to do, I get the slow cure stuff, and I can generally do 12 to 15 fly bodies before it hardens up and I have to mix another batch of it. And you'll see, I'll show you the stuff I use to mix it. For the fur, you can use rabbit, muskrat, any kind of a tan hide. And I cut to this shape because if you cut into a long strip, sometimes it'll break and the fly doesn't look like it's heavy bodied enough. You saw how big that bullhead was up at the head. And I want a heavy set of shoulders on it. So here I've got a lot of fur across this section. And it doesn't wrap around the hook as easily when you cast it. So you see all this stuff, when I design some of these things, I start thinking about, well, wait a minute here, this isn't right. Well, how can I stop that? So, you know, you're changing your cutting pattern on your fur. The hair, what I do on a hide, this is the half of a hide. And arbitrarily quarter it that way and quarter it long ways. And I call the front end A and the back end D. A, B, C, D. And this is just so that if you bought a hide and you mark it, you'll know where the best hair comes from. If you're going to do a lot of flaring, everything C and D, get away from the backbones. D1, C1 aren't real hollow. Nature has provided a hollow hair, not hollow but with an insulating material in the center of the fibers that's compressible, but it's more solid up near the backbone. And as it gets down near the rib cage, where the internal organs have to be kept warmer, nature's provided a little heavier diameter hair and with more insulating factor. In fact, the belly probably is the heaviest section on the whole entire hide. So a lot of my flaring, I use C2, D2, C3, D3, and the 4s if they have suitable hair. Usually on a deer, the color on C4 will change to white. So if you want white flaring hair, the front of this stuff here is primarily good for wings on goofus bugs or what have you. And a little of that goes a long way. So if you buy a hide sometime, instead of, if you can, tell somebody you just want a half of the rear half. And you'll get a lot of great flaring hair. This is a bunch of hair that's been stacked where the ends are evened out, and I've cut off all the big long butt sections. There's a reason for this. When it is flared, if I left these big long butt sections on, they would come back and intermingle with the collar hair and you'd have a real mess. But you see where they're at now? You can take your scissors and push this out of the way when you trim that to shape, and you don't have to separate those big butts. Otherwise, they'd have been all stuck back into that entire collar, and you don't want that. This is a compressor tool. This, I'm going to demonstrate this head anyway, on a deer hair head. I'll tie a wing and a head on. And all this does is slide all the hair back and compress it very tightly so that you don't have any gaps or voids in the hair. I tie the kiwi. I offer it in the catalog in 3 different color combinations. I give a pure white. Sometimes I'll use white hair for the flare if people want it. And the same thing here, black wing, and sometimes if they want it, I'll put black collar on the black flipped head. And a gray color, or a grizzly, or chinchilla they call it sometimes for rabbit fur. But those 3, and I might vary the body to something like this, an Angora yarn with a gold oval rib on it. This is a nice rainbow that came out of, and it went right back into the river, by the way. It was a 6 pound, 5 ounce, I believe, rainbow, just fat as a hog. It was 2 feet long exactly from the tip of his nose to his tail. But he took it on a little number 6 kiwi muddler. And there's another one came on a kiwi. Real nice, fat, heavy rainbow. Seem to like the kiwis. The body on a zonker. I'm going to come back and tie both of these anyway, so while we're on the slides, we'll stay with them. This is a piece of tape. I have it written down on the zonker sheet what the name is and where you might be able to get it. I take and make a mark. This mark that's parallel with a hook shank is a certain distance from here to here, and I have a chart on the sheet. And then the distance from this edge to there is on the sheet, and the distance from here to here. And that's all that's for is to get a uniformity, that's all. When you start trimming, the first cut is parallel with a hook shank on that first line we had there. Then this point up to here will be the next cut. Then you can flop that over and cut from here to there, and it gives the other thing, and then round this off just a hair, and then you can slide your mylar tubing over top of this thing, tie it down, and you get a nice rounded belly on it with enough clearance to hook a fish. I use a whip finisher made out of a toothpick and some 6/0 mono, a little piece of mono with a loop on it. And I just wrap about 5 or 6 turns, put my finger behind it, and stick the end of the thread up through the loop, pull it out the back, and it's whip finished. I epoxy this body because if you don't, mylar is very fragile and will tear up real quick. I don't think I've ever had one of my epoxy bodies get torn up bad at all. In fact, I can't remember ever having even torn up a little. So that epoxy does, and it makes the whole body much stiffer. I squeeze this whole section in a pair of flat-jawed pliers to get it nice and straight and to have it lay so that it's right, in line. If you looked at an end view, this point right here would be right over the hook point, okay, so that it's not skewed off to the side, so the fly swims properly. The finished thing is just a soft hen hackle wound on, just like we did the soft hackle, and you tie a fur strip in up at the head, stretch it up tight, take a dubbing needle and split the fur, and take your thread and tie in the back end. And like I was telling you, Whitlock tells me this is the anal spot. By the way, I just threw this in for the heck of it. This is a clipped deer head miracle minnow tied by my friend Tim England down in Colorado. Most gorgeous thing you ever saw. Tim's an artist. He does a lot of the illustrating for Rod and Reel magazine. If you look, you'll see Tim England's name under for credits for illustrations. But he does all this painting. He gave me one of the things, and I'm going to make a little shadow box and hang it up in it. It's too nice to fish with. But it is gorgeous. This is a hairy brown leech. A real simple pattern. We use it a lot in lakes, marabou tail, and a little bit of lead on a front third. Then the rest is mohair, and I use my mohair in a flare type bobbin. You don't waste as much. And you pick this out with a needle, and it makes it real fuzzy and bulky. One of my friends I guided on the Clark Canyon Reservoir, that happens to be 11 pound, 7 ounce rainbow. Took it on that little number 8 hairy brown leech, mohair leech. It's probably my favorite pattern for lake fishing. I don't think I'd go out on a lake. There's only 3 patterns I carry out on the lake. And one is a chironomid imitation, and one is this hairy brown leech, and the other one is George Biggs down in Idaho has developed a fly for chironomids. He calls Biggs Sheep Creek Special. And those 3 flies, will take care of just about everything you run across. Okay, that gets into dry fly. We'll stop there. I'll let you turn that off.
Back to an old question. The head on that zonker was really, the shape on the head on the zonker was beautiful.
Oh,
I'll
that's
ask
built up with
again.
thread.
Just build it up. Is there any,
When when the hair, when you tie it in, if this was the hair, I would trim. I'll just take a piece of this. That first strip, when I tie it in, I cut the corners off, and I'll tie it in, and when I get down in there, there's less bulk, so that it automatically just goes right down into a taper, yeah, and it worked out real neat. Okay, kiwi muddler. I use a DEFCON epoxy to cover these bodies with. Here, I'll pass one of these around, take a look at that body alone, and I'll tie on this one here. These I've already made up ahead of time. Like I say, they're so simple that I don't want to waste your time doing that, because there's not a whole lot that's very difficult to that. This is the fur strips. I made a little stripping device so that I can cut these things any width that I want. And let me see, I might just make a black one here. The length that you cut the hide sometimes depends on a lot of things, and one of them is how long the hair is. And I get an idea real quick, and I can work with it accordingly, because some hides will have hair on it's very long. And I start off here by taking my scissors and making, for the head part, a little longer taper cut on it. And then pull the hair out, because I don't want to cut all the hair away when I cut the long back taper. I gave 3 of these kiwis one day to Steve Rajeff, who's he's been a world casting champion. If you read the books at all, you see his picture with sage rods, or I guess airflow lines down, whatever. He endorses quite a bit of things. And I gave him 3 of them, and this was a long time ago when he was a caster but not a fisherman. And he snapped the wings off of all 3 of my kiwis, and I had fished all day for 2 days with the same fly and hadn't snapped it off. And he said he caught a lot of fish on it, but he snapped the wings off. He wanted to know if he could have some more. And I told him, no, not until you learn how to cast. His casting was tournament style, and it was just too hard. And he actually popped that whole rabbit skin wing off. I couldn't believe it. Now, right where that red collar is, I'm just going to tie that in. And what this whole thing about, the technique we're worried about here is going to be tying deer hair. So I'll just tie this wing on and get this out of the way. And this fly, unlike a lot of them, lends itself to a lot of different tying sizes. You can make this thing longer than, as long as you want, as the fur is long. Or you can make it as small as you want. But it's got a lot of action. All the hair work I do, I use a size A tying thread. That sounds kind of big. Like I was telling you before, I find that it doesn't cut the thread, and it's very difficult to break. And I've got used to using one size A. Lots of strength. I've tried Kevlar. A lot of people say, what do you think of Kevlar? Kevlar cuts the hair. You can tie in a bunch of hair and pull Kevlar up real tight and it'll go poof, and it'll just wipe out the entire clump of hair you tie in. So it's not, not my favorite. Okay, here I've got some hair that's pretty good for flaring. And what I do a lot of times is certain pieces of hair, the length will vary and the markings on them will vary. And I'll try to pick some that will flare nice and that has the markings the right size. And depending on the size fly, again, remember when I was telling you about wing quills from different sized birds, ducks, geese, teal, starling? Same thing for deer. If you're tying, I tie little retort hoppers in size 16 commercially with a clipped deer hair head. I use coastal deer hair because it's so small. Coastal deer hair is only about that long, and it works out real fine. So that you vary, the quality or the animal size a lot of times determines how big or how long and heavy the furs or hair is going to be. So you'll go accordingly. Now I made out 2 new sheets on working with hair. I don't think any of the other seminars had. And I tried to show basically what happened. These hair fibers aren't really hollow. They have a pithy inside core that has a high insulation value. And it's compressible. This thing is a stacker if you haven't used one.
Now you cover your hook shaft with thread.
I do. Yeah, the old thing was tying on a bare hook. And again, I don't know who starts some of this stuff. But like I say, there were very few people that contest the early writers. I'd have given them
It's
real
still
fits.
floating around that.
Oh yeah, I'd have given them real fits, I'm afraid. Decide how long you want your wing, your collar rather. I want it back to the point of the hook, so I'm going to hold it right here, and I'll transfer it. This is the part I was telling you about cutting the butts off so that when you flare this, you don't want these to mix in with a collar hair. Now, if I take and put a couple wraps on this thing, and if I pull this up real tight now, I've compressed the hair fully and it won't spin very nicely. But if I put a little bit of pressure on it, it's just enough to get it started. And as I come around the hook shank with a bobbin and continue increasing the pressure, the hair will sort of flatten out, and when it's fully compressed to the maximum, it won't go around anymore. It's as it's compressing is when it allows it to distribute itself around the hook shank, okay? Okay, now that's fully, it's not going to go anywhere else because it's pulled up as tight as I can pull it. If you were going to stack it, what you would do for a wing like on an elk hair caddis, then you would hold it in one place, and you'll see when I tie the elk hair, that's what I'm going to do. And every time I do one of these, I put a good shot of varnish in at the base of those hairs.
How many wraps of thread have you put around it to flare it at that point?
I do 2 to start it,
Yeah?
and then I might go an extra 1 or 2. And it's not really that
To
critical.
spin.
Yeah, and a lot of times with those extra ones, I'll pull the hair back. Watch when I do this, and you'll see. Because I'm going to have to add about 3 clumps of hair on this. Here's the second clump. Now it's not compressed too fully. I can just go around 1. And I'll pull this all back. Okay, so that's enough. So that wasn't too many. That was 1 extra turn on that thing. So 2 to start it, and then 1 extra. Hair, a lot of people just dazzle them. You know, when I first started giving seminars, there weren't as many people who were accustomed to using hair, and I do this and they go, yeah, it looks easy. Look, and it is easy. There's a secret right here. A thread and the proper type of hair. If you get hair that's from the wrong part of the animal body, it just doesn't want to compress and flare, and then it won't. You can't have it evenly distributed around the hook shank. I'm going to tie one of my hair spiders on the dry fly section here. I get into it after these streamers, and you'll see that it's imperative that you do it properly, because if you don't, when you look at the front of the fly, there'll be too many gaps. You'll have it, if it doesn't go all around, you have a big open gap in there someplace. Now, before you start trimming this thing, you pull everything forward. You can see that first little collar that I cut, maybe. I don't know if you can see that real well that way or not, but that is a start. I'll just take a pair of straight scissors and I'll cut in almost so that those hairs, I'll show you when after, I'll stop here in a certain place. This is all doing all the rough cutting now. I'm just getting the basic shape so that I can come along and finish it up. Okay, right now, you notice these hairs, that was the first bunch I tied in. There's that bunch there. If you're going to tie something like a Dahlberg diver, that'd be a good way to start it. Now what I can do here is I can take, I'm going to get a couple long ones, I can take and push the collar hair away. And I can come in and just get that bunch of hair in there, and I can cut it off without cutting the collar hairs off. I think the collar hairs add a lot. They probably give a little bit of a pulsing motion to the fly when you retrieve it. And you saw how big those pectoral fins were on that sculpin.
in terms of either aesthetics or fishing or tying qualities, comment on packing it in tight versus having your clumps loose.
Okay, in theory, if you pack it real tight, the floatability probably goes up. And if you're fishing a sunken fly, maybe that's not so good, okay? Really, maybe a little sloppier tied head will give you a better sinking fly. In fact, if you want a fly that's really going to sink, maybe use a wool head and get away from the floating stuff. But, you know, the hair heads, the clipped hair heads have done so well. And most of our rivers aren't that deep, and you're not fishing the flies that deep sometimes, and the trout will come up and get them. Now, with a razor blade, you can sneak in here and flatten the base out. And this is the part that sometimes a lot of people have trouble with. I like a razor blade, but you have to be real careful. They cut really quick. And you can stick this thing down in next to the eye and give it a little rounding cut, and it'll get rid of a lot of those hairs that you don't want to waste your time with a pair of scissors. And you can get almost every hair that you don't like. If you think they're in the way, that little, but you do have to have a pretty sharp pair of scissors. And then the final trimming is just bringing this back. And what it does, your scissors will leave a little bit of a choppiness in the trimming of the hair, whereas a razor blade will take them all out. I don't think you have to get extra fussy about this. And I sort of sneak back again and, you know, get this fairly even, just to the eye. And I always look at the symmetry of the head. If I have, like this now, I had more hair on one side than I did on the other, so I'll just take my razor blade and very carefully, because like I say, the razor cuts so fast that you can scalp a fly. And that means you start all over again. And of course, it's good practice. And again, as with any tying, I find that the first fly or two I trim I do with a deer hair head. I don't do too fast, because you haven't done it for a while, and it's sort of like getting used to the material and just knowing how it's going to lay on the hook, and you know pretty much, it gives you a good indication of what your trimming is going to be like after that. If you keep using a different type of hair, a different batch of hair, even, you know, if you get one animal and then you change the body part where it's from, sometimes it doesn't spin the same, because like I say, every part of the body has a little different hair, so you're going to have to pretty much. And I'm looking generally for a flattened, sculpin type tapered head. Okay, I think that's all right. Get the last little touch here. And a final shot of varnish into that thing.
You don't do those in 2 minutes and 35 seconds?
No, no. In fact, I can tell you a story about this. I won't even mention his name, because it would be embarrassing to him. A well-known fly fisherman who's authored a couple books on fly tying was at my house fishing with me, and he says, "Al," he says, "I can put the hair on a kiwi muddler and trim it to shape in 1 minute." And I said, "Blank, your mother never taught you to tell time." I said, "I'm tying 2 to your 1, and it takes me 3 minutes each. And you do them in 1 minute each." I said, "Explain that to me." And he changed the subject. So, but I would guess that probably almost all of us here may have his book, or one of his 2 books. And
Let's guess who it is.
take a wild one.
Are there several of your flies in his 2 books?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
And it was kind of funny, because I'm sitting there and we're both tying, and I'm going 2 to 1 on the trimmed hair heads. The night before we tied all the bodies, and we were going to put the heads on the next day before we went fishing, and we had all the answers. But like I say, I figured he didn't know how to tell time. Zonker bodies, like I was showing you, pretty easy. You can use some different materials. Here's a pearlescent material that has some, what do you call it?
Have you already pulled the core out of that piece of mylar you have there?
Let me check and see.
Wondering how you do that.
Yeah, it's all out. All you do is you slide the thing back and a core sticks out, and you just, and it'll come out of a piece like this, the whole thing, instead of cutting individual ones at a time. Yeah, this has already been pulled out. Okay, here, let me see. I need 2 bobbins on this. I need my hair whip finish when I see it. Well, like I say, the more of those heads you trim, the more consistent you become. And certain types of, in fact, a lot of times I tie flies for display cases. I do a lot of that. And what I do is take, when I'm tying, I find an extraordinarily great piece of hair. I take my felt tip marker and write on the back, save for display. And I know that, you know, I'm going to get a super colossal looking fly out of it. Not that it's going to catch fish any better, but, you know, again, for the cosmetics, it's going to be really pretty. Okay, this body's been varnished and everything. Fur strip. Again, this is what I was telling you about tying that zonker to get that nice head. If you make a little cut here on the head, a little taper. You can also do this with a pair of, with a razor blade. Okay, let's see how long we want this puppy. Here. For a while, zonkers were in real popular fly, and a lot of people were tying and fishing them. But I think since the last few years we've been in a drought condition. What's happening is there's fewer and fewer streamer fly fishermen out there because low water really doesn't lend itself to real effective streamer fly fishing at times. So, okay.
Looks like it's going to be another dry one this year.
It does, doesn't it?
Boy, it was
Let me see, I
depressing
want to put a,
coming
oh,
down
here
this
we go.
way.
I get the BS and I'll forget my collar.
Snow.
This is hen hackle, and the same thing goes for tying it. If you leave yourself maybe, I usually put a little bigger collar on a streamer fly, and I'll tie in the tip. I take a pair of hackle pliers if I can find them. There. And by moistening my fingers and pulling the fibers back, I take and double the hackle back, so that when I wrap it now, and I keep the twist of the hackle going the right way as I wind it, and keep all the fibers laying in the back. You notice they lay back really nice. Okay. Let me see, I want a black thread on here for tying that in.
You clip the hair off the front of that where you're tying it in?
No, I just pulled it back.
You just pull it back.
And this is where, you know, you're talking about getting a little nicer shaped head. The amount of thread and how you build the thing up. And most people that tie streamer flies do this anyway. This is, you know, this is old hat really. I'm going to run an epoxy on one of these things too here, so that when I pass it out, it'll be completely finished. I'll have to let it dry though, because it takes a wee bit longer to dry on it. Okay, if you wet the remaining piece down, this is my little whip finisher here. pull this back up out of the way. And I'll start my tying thread in here. And wet this down a little bit. And if you stretch it to hide a little bit and take your dubbing needle and run it right through there, you can lift up and it separates. And that's basically where you're going to tie that thing in, right here. Okay. And this little whip finisher, I've got one on each end in case one of these break. Sometimes they're fragile, but this one's lasted quite a while. And it's just a matter of laying here and not a whole lot more than 5 or 6 turns, because if you get too many turns, then you can't pull your whip finisher out of there. Okay, and I'm going to keep my finger in the back of this thing so that I can get the end of this thread back through my little loop here.
Is this like the same sort of principle as a fly wrap on a guide?
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
Geez, I had it in there and pulled it out. Let me get my light in the right place there. There we go. Gooey. I've got a piece of fur, okay, that keeps sticking there, and it keeps grabbing the thread and pushing the thread out of the way. There we go. Okay. Now I'll epoxy that here, and I'll pass that around, and we'll get into dry flies. Let me see, kiwis. But if you find hair that does a nice job for you, in fact, a lot of times when you're looking for good hair or good whatever to work with, try tying it on some different things. And if you like the way it looks, mark it so that the next time you look for it, you're going to have it.
Is it too late to have a look at the patch of hair that you used to tie that?
No, I can get that real quick. This, I've had patches that I like that are better than this, but this isn't a bad piece.
I don't have the opportunity to get a hide. Mainly, you know, I have to go into a shop and I have to, you know, like, if I'm lucky, I can examine a large patch, and I mean, what do? You know, like, is there any distinguishing characteristic about this that would just not?
Basically, you have to know what part of the body it came from.
I see, okay.
And if you get it, you know, from the right place, you're going to have the right kind of hair.
So we're looking at the back and the lower sections, is that correct?
Right. You know, I brought a pile of stuff that, oh, here it is. I knew I had it. This is a 5-minute epoxy I'll use on this thing. If you're in a hurry, and get somebody to save your old coffee can lids. Makes a good palette to mix your epoxy on. And this stuff sets up in 5 minutes.
This is for coating your Zonker bodies, your Mylar bodies?
Or doing the heads. Mm-hmm. If you want, you know, exhibition quality heads with a minimum of effort, this isn't a bad way to do it.
Exhibition quality being that glossy,
oh yeah,
consistent,
yeah.
Mm-hmm. A little
an old knife or something, a spoon handle or whatever to mix this stuff up, and a paper towel. To wipe off the excess. And your basic dubbing needle. Oh, I didn't trim that too close. I see the hair hanging down. And I'll just have to take epoxy that puppy down. I get this little section first that's on the back end. Like I say, if this is quick dry stuff, you can do about 3 flies and this hardens up till you can't use it anymore. But if you get a regular drying thing, you can do about a dozen flies before it'll harden up. And it'll take all the bumps out of your tying thread and give you a nice smooth looking head. but you do have to work with it kind of quick, and you can't, once it starts to set up and it starts drawing stringers, if you haven't used epoxy much, if it starts, you know, a spider web comes off with it, that's the time to mix up a new batch, because it'll drive you crazy, and it'll start, it won't conform to a new shape. It'll just stay kind of lumpy and bumpy looking.
Are you just coating, or are you
That's all
building
it
a
is.
shape?
Just coating. Just coating. It'll flow. It'll flow. And you don't want to put too much on, because it'll all flow down. And as soon as it sets up, I'll pass this around or whatever, take a peek at that. But that's all there is to doing. And if you're, like I say, if you were doing a shadow box type of mount, and you want your flies to look like super colossal heads, that's one of the ways you do it. Using epoxy. If you're only doing a couple, slow dry. For a lot of them, quick dry for just, you know, 1 or 2 or 3 of them. Okay, let's see. Elk hair caddis, dry flies. Okay, something new. New bunch of pictures.
See the elk hair caddis, huh?
Oh, I've tied a few of those.
I bet you do.
A few of them we've tied, I'm afraid.
Slides.
Okay, let me see. Where does this go here? Let me see what that runs out here. It's done and goes to, okay.
You say mono, is that what you mean by A? Mono thread? A?
Monocord A. Yeah, monocord is just a type of cord it is,
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah. So now this is just another picture of one of our fly boxes. A lot of pale morning duns laying there in a compare dun type of row. A few of those parachutes, a lot of parachutes here, different color wings. We'll show you some pictures on that and the reason behind it. And naturally our elk hair caddis. Believe it or not, this takes a major portion of our dry fly fishing throughout this entire summer, guiding.
Just that section of flies.
Just that section of flies right there, yeah. Maybe in different sizes. We tie these in a size 17, and we tie these in 16s and 17s. These are 16s and 17s, and these are 12, 14s, and 16s. So, not a whole big variety of stuff. But we're interested in flies that catch fish, and by God, they do the job. Let's talk about hackle a little bit. First of all, if you're going to store your hackle, I take a razor blade and I bend the neck until I find size 10 hackles where they go to 8s. I don't use the 8s, so I take and cut that part off. On the front end, on the nape, I take and bend them over and check them on my hackle gauge until I get size 18s. I cut that off. I put this in a separate bag. Now I have a patch that all that's on here is 16s through 10. That's the basic sizes I do most of my stuff. My catalogs for hackled flies, a lot of them are 16, 10, 12, 14, 16, those sizes. So the rest of it, you know, there's no sense in storing that big part. This is my hackle gauge with a brown hackle stretched over the pin. You can read, it'll read 16. A lot of time when I'm gauging hackle, for elk hair caddis, I like a little smaller hackle. So instead, if I'm tying a number 12 hook, I'll come right between 14 and 12, right in the middle. The hackles that come to that size, I'll just lay them down and I call them 13s. If I got them in a bag, it says 13. So I use a half size, or however you want to call it, one size. We're so accustomed to saying 12, 14, 16, or 12 to 14 is one size. It's not, it's really two sizes. Because 12, 13, and 14 is the way it goes. 13 is one size, 14 is two sizes. But we've become so accustomed to doing it one way that we've lost track of what's going. So now, when you say 12 to 14, most people say, yeah, it's just one size. But it's really two sizes. But if you're going to get along in the everyday world, you better say like everybody else, it's one size. For using the gauge, for white colored hackle on a white face, what you do is you take your lamp and you put it off to the side of your hackle gauge so that the face of this goes sort of charcoal gray, and there's just the amount of light spilling over that it lights up the hackles, and you can see that this is a size 14. It's almost easier to read in dark hackle. So blue duns, gingers, and creams, and grizzlies, I put the light over on the side, and it makes it pretty darn easy to see what's going on. I keep my, once I sort hackles, I might go through 2, 3, 4 Mets necks at a time. I'll razor blade them off into the 16 to thing. I leave the 18s and smallers on the nape and do them as I need them. And after I size them, I've got little bags that tell me what size I need where. And I have, all the grizzlies are on this shoulder hook, and they go from size 8 to 20. Same thing for all the others. And I have it hanging right behind my background piece. Hackle pliers. This is crocus cloth. Like I was telling you, it's a polishing. It's cutting, but it's cutting so slow that it's really polishing, or polishing to the eye. There's always little scratches that this makes, but they're unidentifiable by the eye, naked eye. So what I do is I take these edges along the hackle pliers and I round them out so that they're not sharp. If the company had to do this, you couldn't afford to buy them. So that if you want to tune up your own tools so they don't break and cut hackle, piece of crocus cloth and clean up the edges. When I grab the hackle, if the hackle is flat and you put the pliers on it this way, the biggest part of the hackle is the stem, and all that you're holding on to is the stem. What I try to do is put the hackle in this way so that I get the stem and some of the fibers. I break very few hackles winding this way. So it's just my own little quirk, something that I do. Caddis hatches, in the evenings you see a lot of caddis, and they're either mating swarms or they're egg laying. The egg laying ones are the ones that are banging on the water, bouncing consistently. The caddis form, I think most of you can identify those, tent-shaped wings, very short body. This is a big caddis found on Henry's Lake. They hit the water. You've watched caddis banging the water surface. What they're trying to do is break the surface tension. These are egg masses in the caddis. This is on a pair of socks. Back a long time ago, I wore waders made by Anderson from England. Anderson waders and imported brogues, leather brogues, and you wore socks between the brogues and the thing instead of wading pieces they have now. They have wading socks now made out of neoprene, but we wore big heavy wool socks so you didn't abrade the wader bottom. The waders were made out of a canvas material, not unlike that of Hodgman, the old Hodgman waders. And they were entirely made that way. But anyway, the caddis would bomb the water until they broke the surface tension. They'd swim down, deposit their eggs on your wader bottoms. You'd have some nights you'd have these and very adhesive, very difficult to clean the stuff off. In fact, if you went home and you didn't immediately scour them off with a good scrub brush, you didn't get them off at all. They were really on there for good. But that's the operation, that's the stage. And after that, they die. They're spent. Remember I was telling you that's the time to get it. Some of the techniques for tying the elk ear caddis we've already covered. Dubbing, we know. The wire coming up through the hackle. This hackle was wound from here back to there. And then the wire up through there to secure it in place. The wire, you can see it here, is bent back and trimmed off so it's double locked in there. It's not just tied in by the end where it would pull out. This is a little thing I made for production tying. They're little stackers made out of 22 caliber long rifle cases. And I flare the tips of them so that I made teeny little stackers. I can stack elk hair for wings. I can stack, when I'm playing with hair, I don't want to stack each elk hair caddis individually. I have a couple of those blocks made where I might stack 4 dozen bunches of hair. Then once I start tying, I never touch the hair other than to tie it onto the hook. I bake 5 wraps to hold the wing in place, slightly longer than the hook shank. And all 5 turns of tying thread are same place. I don't want to make them like a rod winder. I don't want them laying side by side. I want everything stacked right over it so that it flares the hair. A razor blade will trim this front end off. And then with your thumb and fingernail, you can sort of push on the top, and I want 180 degrees. You notice that if you come back and forth across here, this is only on the top half of the hook. These serve as little outriggers and help support the fly in addition to the hackle. You can tie this fly, by the way, without hackle. I've been doing it for years. I tie my 18s, 20s to 24s with no hackle because I feel that the hackle sometimes retards the hooking of fish. in very small fly sizes, so I've omitted the hackle and I tie no hackles. For hair sizes, can you see the difference in diameter between this hair and that hair? This is from a calf, and this is from a cow. Bleached, both of them. I've been using bleached hair. The originals were tied with bull elk, but since then I've learned that this stuff is more visible to the angler. Most of my clients are older people. They have difficulty seeing their flies, so every little thing I can do to help improve that part of the game, I do. As far as the color, I don't think the fish give a hoot one way or the other. And like I say, the little devils I tie, this is a no hackle, there's a 24 and there's a little compare down. Both of these are tied with elk hair. But that's pretty small. So remember again, scaling your materials to the appropriate size of the hook. Really important.
What kind of dubbing do you use on those tiny flies?
This is Spectrum, which I don't really like. I finally got Steve Kennard at Rocky Mountain Dubbing to do this job on the muskrats. And in the future, everything that I do on all my flies is going to be muskrat, because I love the way it dubs. It would be so smooth, the body would look as small as I want it to look, and the individual fibers on a muskrat are so fine that it just, you know, does the prettiest job you'd want to do. There's a no hackle. Different colors I tie.
Do you taper the body to make a...
Sometimes I do and sometimes I do. Most of the time I do. Although you shouldn't, because caddis have a pretty much the same size from the front to the back. If you look at a caddis body, they're not tapered like a mayfly is. And I don't know, I've gotten in a rut maybe. I should probably be making the body the same size all the way through. Now, the technique of tying the hackle with a wire is the same thing. This is a Griffith net, and the way it was tied is a fine 7x or 8x piece of mono out the back first. You tie the peacock in up here, take your thread to there, wind your peacock back to here, come up through it with your tying thread, tie your grizzly hackle in on the heavy end, and wind it to the rear. Come through the hackle with your 7x or 8x mono and tie it off. And you've got a Griffith net that's virtually indestructible. Because palmered hackle, one sharp tooth, and it unwinds and you throw your fly away. By the way, this, anybody know what this is? This insect.
Spruce moth?
A what?
Spruce budworm moth?
Yeah, spruce budworm moth. This came off the big hole. And spruce budworm, an elk hair caddis in a 12 or 10 is about as nice a pattern as you'd want for this thing. This particular day, I was shooting pictures of the guy fishing. My client was fishing and catching fish, and I was shooting pictures of him landing fish, and I thought, I better get a few pictures of this moth on there also.
How I have no idea the scale.
A size 12.
A size 12.
Yeah, perfect, size 12. They're not very big. These are those little white flowers. I couldn't find anything to scale it with that didn't look hokey when I took the picture.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, maybe people that fish enough, you know, in July, late July, have seen this little flower growing pretty profusely along the shores of the river. And they're very tiny. They're maybe 3/8 inch in diameter. So if that's 3/8, that makes this about a 1/2 inch then. Okay, that gets to be a different thing altogether. All right, let's go through that too, because I'm going to kill these birds with one stone. The techniques are different. This is on the, you can't see the 7, but that's 7/19, July 19th. Little isoperla, little yellow stone, little yellow Sally, whatever you want to call it. 12:57, right in the middle of the day, almost 1 o'clock. There's been a hatch, not a hatch, but a spinner fall. This is an adult, ready to lay its eggs. Nice place for stoneflies, a fast, shallow ripple, followed by a deep hole. A good place for trout to come out of the deep hole and distribute themselves all along this shallow gravel bar. We had maybe 18 or 20 fish working in here. You can see his line just starting to straighten out. He had a fish laying clean over there. And he made a great cast, and it was just straightened out perfect. And there it was, pow. Okay? But it's a super hatch. It's not a hatch really, it's a spinner fall. most stoneflies, they crawl up on things to emerge. So that the trout really don't have an opportunity to get an emergent stonefly. You'll find the little isoperla nymph shucks all over bridge abutments, certain logs, certain stones that are sticking out of the water. Thousands of them, literally. As close together as they can get. They hatch early in the morning usually. They migrate over to the shoreline during the night and get up on these impoundment, pier butts, and they dry their wings and fly over to some willow branch. They have a little mating that's done just like the big salmon fly does in the brush. And then the important part, from 11 a.m. usually till 4 p.m., right in the middle of the day, they're out there laying their eggs. As soon as they lay their eggs, they die. And when they die, the trout know this is, easy meat. They can get them no problem at all. So it's a good hatch to know, and that's the stage that's important. I mean, if you're going to tie an emergent isoperla, you're wasting your time, because you'd have to have a fly and you'd have to tie it or glue it to a piece of rock, because, and it's tied basically like an elk hair. The dubbing here, to get this transition from one to the other, you dub a little bit of red and you dub the gold right over top of the red, so you have some little red sort of showing through, so the transition goes very pretty into this thing. The hackle tied in up front. A number of turns. I like to make my first 3 turns, and same thing on an elk hair caddis. The first 3 turns pretty close together, and then I palmer the balance of it to the bend of the hook. I'll trim off the butt, run my wire up through here. On this particular fly, though, I like a wing, and I've been using John Faust from Hamilton has a winging material that I really like. I bend it, I cut a little strip of it, the width I want and the length I want, with a razor blade and a straight edge, and I bend it right down the middle, and I trim just 1/2, and I open it up. And that way you can preserve the symmetry of the wing. If you try to cut the entire wing, you'd have it looking pretty bad. But if you make a fold down the middle, 1 cut, and you've got it. Tie it on top. Now the hackle, I trim the hackle off the top of that, tie the wing in here, and put my elk hair wing on top. At one time, I knew this was a great pattern. I've been using it for years, and I couldn't sell it. So I called it a gold elk hair caddis. Everybody bought my elk hair caddis like crazy. And I wanted them to, and I'd write a little note, try this when this little yellow stone or little yellow Sally comes off, blah, 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 And finally, I added the wing on the bottom, because like I was saying, the trout eat this thing, and this is what they're after. They see this, spent wing, and if they're looking for silhouettes, which they probably are, that's what they're going to see. Here's a little yellow isoperla shot from underwater. You got a body, wings, and legs, and antenna, the predominant parts. I would guess that the long, thin body is a primary triggering device to feed, and maybe the legs secondary and the wings next. But the wings are always sort of spent, and usually this one wasn't a spent fly. I just set it on top of the water and photographed it. And if it would have been a spent fly, these wings would have been in the same shape, maybe even further out. They have 4 wings, by the way. And sometimes the wings will extend out over a larger area. And I believe the trout know that this thing isn't going to jump off the water and get away, so they really key in on spent flies. Okay, so much for that. I have a habit of talking very fast sometimes, so if I breeze through something too quickly, holler out. Okay, elk hair caddis. Let me see, here's my little block, here's my little stackers. These little stackers, there's a number. If you know somebody that has a drill press, that's probably the easy way to make them. You take and put a center punch in a drill press and set this down on a drill press table and bring the drill press ram down until it flares. And there'll be a certain place where they start to crack or break. And what you do, there's a ring, a depth adjustment on a drill press, and you can lock that down so that before you come to the breaking spot, it'll stop, it'll bottom out, so that you'll have them all uniform. And when you're doing them, do a whole gang of them at one time. Okay, now for this particular hair here, I like to use a 3/0 thread. I find that you can put a lot more pressure on. I had a bottom.
What are we tying now?
I'm gonna tie an elk hair caddis.
Oh.
What happened to the other bobbin I had? Did you guys see what I did with that? I had the good bobbin with the ceramic head here, and did I take it off? Does anyone see a bobbin?
You had,
I couldn't have thrown it in a bag, could I?
But under the altar.
That'll be a son of a gun. Let me see. I may have thrown it in a bag. I didn't do that. Did I knock it on the floor? Oh, yes. That was my good bobbin. It's got to be here someplace.
You can rewind the video and
Huh?
watch and see where
yeah, right.
See where it went.
Good thinking. Good
It's
thinking.
security company over here.
We have the proof.
Can't imagine what I did with that. Yeah, you can pass that thing around. Now that should be dry. A lot of times this stuff lays here and you're looking right at it and you don't
Oh, I
even.
do that all the time.
Yeah,
These things in plain sight on my bench, just about.
I have good intentions when I do these things. I start off real neat and more stuff gets laid out, more stuff gets laid out. Okay, here's a hackle. This has already been sized. I think that's size 12 or 14 or whatever, if I remember right.
You've got some of those out in the store incidentally.
Ah, thanks. The first hare's ear I tied was with hare's ear because it was a pattern that an English writer, G.M. Skews, suggested. Here it is, right between my legs. Ah, fell down between the. Okay, he wouldn't have caught that. I tied.
Skews tied the.
Well, he
hare's
tied.
ear?
No, he tied a fly called a little red sedge, and you know in England the sedge is a caddis fly, right? So I liked his technique of tying part of it. So I thought, God, I'm going to have to try that, and I did, and it was kind of a neat way to tie this thing. Now, depending on how straight or crooked your hair is, and how long the fibers are, sometimes I double stack. I'll have, like I say, when I prepare hair, I'll prepare a bunch of it at one time. And for broken ends, you can take, and if you slide your fingernail along there, you can pick up the broken ends and they'll pull right out because the tapered ones don't let you, get a grasp on it.
So you predominantly use that very light bleached.
Yeah, this is bleach. Now, I'm going to pass these two
cow.
pieces around and take a look at the texture. One is cow and one is calf. And the calf I'd use for the little stuff, okay? And the elk hair is a real meat and potatoes fly. I was going to say, I really do. I think I could fish all year if I just didn't like to fish some other patterns and get away with this pattern all year.
How about hooks?
This,
Size and
yeah,
shape,
I was just
weight?
going to start on that too. This is a 1X short hook. This is, Dairiki sells it under a, what is it, a 305 number. 305 Dairiki. That's Bailey's. I can't remember the number. I think it's a 1310 or something like Daiichi. All these companies, they just they have to same product, different number, different identification number.
No.
And that's that would be like if when I manufactured my hackle gauge and I said I'll give you the exclusive dealership of Hackle Master gauge, okay? And you say great. So you take and you feel I'm the sole distributor. Then he comes along and says, I'd like to have a hackle gauge, but I'd like to have the exclusive. I says, okay, let's call it the Hackle Maker. And that's what these people have done. They've changed the name to confuse and the number for identifying to confuse you, that's all.
Teal going over to do the same stuff. Or Umpqua and others.
But the first pattern I tie, now this GM Skews, his little red sedge was tied exactly this way up until the up here wing. He tied, come on, get that hackle. Get that hackle.
Hey, Al, getting off the subject, how come Orvis sells your elk-haired caddis and they call it an elk wing caddis or something?
they don't want to use my name. Some people like to use my name, some don't. And they just don't.
Orvis only likes to use their own name.
Yeah, that's right. That's strictly right. Yeah, that's why. And if something ever came up on the exclusive rights to a fly, it might have some bearing. They say, well, we're not tying an elk here in Canada, we're tying an elk green Canada. But if you took them to court and you had a good lawyer, you could probably prove that this is the same as that. So, you know, this kind of what I used to do every time I tie, I used to write more than I do now. I may start writing again. I would write just to document different things that I did. Because I've had people come in, and I had, well, again, I don't want to mention his name, but I had one well-known writer, author come in and said, oh, you like my pattern? And I said, what? And he says, the pattern you're tying, and it was my scud pattern. And I says, oh, really? I said, when did you come up with that? And he came up with a date, and I said, how old are you? And he was 23. And I dug a magazine out that had the scud pattern in, that meant that he did this thing when he was 3 years old. And I said, God, that's phenomenal. You came up with that when you were 3. And he got this look on his face. And, you know, and he's as nice as pie to me. In fact, he just sent me some stuff in a book the other day, written real nice, you know, thing in the front end. And I mean, he's really nice about it, but he thinks about things in a little different manner than he did then. But there's the body of the elk-hair cat. Up to here, this is Skews' his little red sedge. What he would do is take some wood duck and maybe a mallard quill and lay it on top and make his little red sedge. And I copied that much from him. The part that's mine is right here with a elk-hair wound. And like I say, this came about because someone gave me an entire hide. I was out on a Montana vacation, and this rancher says, do you have any use for this? And I says, yeah. And I had the entire hide. So I like my wings just a little bit longer. And this is a stacking operation. Our first turn, right, 4, 5 turns, all right over top each other. Held it here. I didn't want that thing to spin around the hook shank. I'll lift this up and put a couple turns under there to hold it. And this is a good time. I get that piece of fuzz off of that. And get under there and wood finish this thing off by holding that right up out of the way.
You take the 2 wraps around the bundle before you put it on the hook?
Not on this one.
Okay.
No, because this one I'd like to have spread around. In fact, you watch, when I'm finished with it, I'm going to take and with my thumbnail, I'm going to sort of, sometimes it works out pretty good that way. To trim this thing, I just sneak in there with a razor blade and make a cut in here. And if there's a loose hair or something that I don't like, I'll just make a snip or two and sort of, you know, get it so it looks a little nicer. Okay, good enough. Now, this is what I do a lot of time. In fact, when I'm tying a bunch of elk hairs, I take and I file my fingernail flat, just in that one little place on this thumb, so that I can take it and press it in here. And what it does is cause the fibers to slide all around the hook shank, and I get about a 360 or 180 on it rather. Okay, let me put a shot of varnish on that, and we'll pass that there now.
Now, you put the varnish on underneath there. I wonder how, you know, one problem I have had from time to time is the elk hair spinning around the hook shank.
You start using varnish and make sure it's real thin. Now this stuff here I should dump out and put a new batch in because it's starting to get to the point where it's not penetrating like it should. And that's what determines when I do this at home. As soon as I see it's not penetrating, but it's been, you know, open up and it's been laying around quite a while now. So
Now this is done with the cow.
this is cow elk, but you see the difference between those 2 pieces I passed around.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Tremendous amount. That real fine calf stuff, great if you're going to do those little no hackles in anything 16s to 24s.
Yeah.
This is what you want to use. It makes a beautiful little wing, and it's the way to go.
You mean like a paraduns or something? No.
Yeah, sure. I use that on my. In fact, when I tie comparadons, most of the comparadons I tie are of small sizes, so I tend to tie them with
A very white wing.
with a very fine hair wing, and that's where the calf comes in. And coastal deer here also.
Right.
Okay, let's see here, Adams. This was, okay, let me see what's next on the list here. Let me see if we got an Adams, wings, and broil wolf.
Now I've seen pictures of your elk hair caddis where you haven't trimmed the head quite as close over the eye as.
Those aren't my flies.
Oh really? The one in the art of the trout fly, isn't that yours?
Oh yeah, that one is.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, it's trimmed like this on the head. I always sort of imagined a little kind of a clump of the ends on the.
No,
That's just a mistaken
I
impression.
trim mine not real close. I like a little. I'll tell you why I like a little bit sticking up. If this my wristwatch was wrapping a thread, if I cut it real close, it'd be too easy to pull out.
Right.
You compress the hair right in this one area. I'm telling you, 5 wraps, real tight right here, and it causes this to stand up on the end. And you trim them off, and it's less likely to pull out. And with a varnish in there, they're virtually indestructible.
This was a 305.
305.
1X short, right?
It's a 1X short, yeah. I have a tendency to tie a lot of my dry flies on 1X short shank hooks. In fact, one of the comparadons I tie, you'll see later on here, will be on a really a short hook. So.
1X short.
Okay. Now we're going to go into.
They don't have a tendency to tip back on you, do they?
No,
Okay.
no. I in fact,
And that's a
all of my comparadons, all of my parachutes, all of my elk-eared caddis are tied on 1X short.
1X.
1X short.
Do you know what's the Daiichi number, or what any ever number besides muscle?
Daiichi is 1310.
Okay.
Dairiki is 305. Kamasan is 405.
10.
We covered all the bases.
Ricky is 305. Dairiki.
Uh-huh. Okay, we're going to get into some new techniques here on a royal wolf and a couple things about some wings. Some of these flies I'm not going to tie, so we're interested in a couple little tricks. Here's a trick you might really enjoy here that works out really great. If you've tied an Adams hackle tip dry fly, perhaps you've had difficulty if you've tried to separate the hackle tips with a figure 8. They go awry and they lay in every direction. First of all, I'm using hen hackle because I like the black and the white. The bars are heavy enough that you can see them real well. And it's a hard fly to see. But what I've done here is taken a piece of thread, and I've used red just to show it, and I've made a loop of it in front of the tie-in spot. I've stood the hackle tips up, and it goes in front, and I twisted this thing, and if you notice, it goes between the wings. And that helps to separate them. Now, there's a little bit more of this coming in. This is another view, so you get a better idea what I'm doing. There's that loop of thread. I save a little nip of thread that I'm tying the fly with. I go in front of the wings and sort of give it a little twist and bring it down through the divided hackle tip wings, and it keeps them in that position. You can do this for a lot of things, so that, you know, a final type of Adams dry fly would look like this. Now, instead of using hackle fibers for tails, I started using elk mane. And I like it, and everybody that uses the fly likes it. It's a little more stiffer and resilient. It does a good job of floating, and a lot of people say, well, capillary action will suck water up into that thing and it'll sink the fly. Well, maybe they're taking it for a stillborn shuck hanging behind the fly. You know, we're tying a lot of emergers with stillborn shucks, so that maybe this is part of it. We're tying quill wings. These are a pair of duck quills. And you see, this is what I was telling you. Remember, I said the first wrap right there on the right-hand side, there's only 2 wraps holding this in place. The first one on the right, you never make a turn to the right of that, because if you do, it'll crumple that wings. I've got those wings cocked just like I want them. So everything from there on out will be behind, and I'll come back and I'm going to wrap in front of the wing to stand them up, but not in front of this turn that was back behind. And you notice how nice they stand up. To split these wings, that same little thing we call a halter. I call it a halter. I saw it in an old English book It was, I have a home, it's copyrighted 1917. The guy was ahead of his time. And he called it a halter. And it goes through the wings and it holds them in the proper position. Because if you're not very careful figure eighting, and you notice I've tied it down, you can pull on this thing to cock them just where you want them, and then tie that thread down and snip it off right there, and you've got the wings perfectly done.
So you don't use a figure eight at all?
No way. No way.
Oh, what a relief.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And
I'll try that right away.
And if you want to tie, a show fly again, for fishing or show, both, this technique is just really, this old fella back in 1917 from England really had the idea. And it's so simple, For wood ducks, there's a couple ways you can handle wood duck feathers. You can either trim the center out and look for a feather that's fairly even across the top so that when you pull all these fibers up, all these things are going to be right straight across and give you a nice square tip
like
wing.
a rolled wing or
Yeah. Or you can take and cut a section out. Get all the ends, lined up and roll the wing up and tie a clump on and divide them up. Now I've wrapped in front, and I've also done something else here with very light pressure. I've gone around each base and around the other side, around that base. And then you moisten your fingers and pull very strongly, as strong as you can without breaking the feathers, up to position the wings where you want them. I don't know why people are afraid to do that. I used to watch these imported flies come in. They'd have a royal wolf with the wings laying on the side like this. And all the clown had to do was pull real hard and set them up in an upright position, and they'd have stayed there with a little drop of varnish. But don't be afraid to give that a pull to line your wings up. And what it does, it shows you, it gives you a nice silhouette. Because again, wood duck I think is kind of a hard material to see out there on the water. The light goes through it, and I'm going to cover something that might be kind of shocking later on. To tie the hackle in, this shows the hackle stem going right up to right behind the eye of the hook. The reason you do this is if you cut the hackle stems off and tie them in right behind the hook, you have a bigger diameter of windings, thread windings behind the wings than you do in front. So that when you wrap your hackle, you're going from a big diameter all of a sudden to a small diameter. And the hackle fibers will go astray and your hackle won't lay properly. And another thing I do, have you noticed that the hackle is being wound on an angle?
Yes.
Because you got a wing on top but none underneath. And I want to cover up this section here, so as I wind, my old friend Roy Donnelly that I used to fish with, he's an old fly tyer. He died back in the 70s. He was 83 or 4 years old. 81 the last year I fished with him on a big hole. And well-known fly tyer. He originated a lot of patterns in the Jackson Hole country. He tied for Bob Carmichael's shop down in Moose, Wyoming. And this was the way he laid his dry fly hackle on an angle like that. And I asked him why one day, and he says, real gruff, "Hey, you dummy," he said, "I want to cover up this bottom part." Oh, okay. So, and his fly is set real nice on the water because for some reason gave the fly more stability. And the second hackle will be wrapped on the same way so that you get a good full coverage and a nice hackling job. I finished like notice how dense the hackle is in through the fly section. Now the fly, and this is something here, fibettes. I'm sure most of you that tied are aware of fibettes. I buy the entire paintbrush. I buy a 1.5-inch paintbrush that, who the hell makes that now?
Bats and
Oh, I can't.
the paintbrush.
The paintbrush, yeah. Do you remember, Eric?
Wasn't,
I'll think of it.
wasn't it Grumbacher?
Grumbacher, yeah. And they make this paintbrush, and all of these, fibers are in there. And I dye one paintbrush ginger. Remember I was telling you I double dye. I dye it pale yellow first, and I go over it with beige or tan to cut the hard yellow off, and I get a nice straw color. And I do a blue dun, and I do an olive dun. So I have 3 paintbrushes, and I use a white one for tricos, white tails.
Do you over dye your blue and your olive duns, and what do you use?
No. For some reason, the dye that I have comes out real nice. For a little dyeing around the house for yourself, I use acetic acid that I buy from Osco or somebody, and Rit dye, and I have a little container. And to standardize my dye bath, I'll put right up to the first line on that capsule of dye per 1 quart of water. Okay? And I'll boil the water and dump the dye in, stir it up real good, and put a teaspoon of this acetic acid in and mix it up. And what it does, it seems to lock the dye bath in a little bit better. It seems like I get a better color, more uniform, and I think the acid may have something to do with it. I don't know if it, if it makes the feather more responsive to the dye bath or what it does, but I've had better luck doing it that way. In fact, somebody was telling me one day you can't dye black with RIT. And I said, really? And I showed them some of my black. And I said, well, how'd you do that? And I said, well, I use acetic acid, and I use a super saturated dye bath. Instead of putting a 1/4 inch in here, I might go up to 4 parts per pint of water instead of a quart of water, and super saturate my dye bath with black dye, and I get a good black color. A pair of hemostats and a little this is one of those Sears and Roebuck 1 burner heaters, so that's all you need. This is a cooking thermometer and an old coffee can. These things corrode pretty quick, but my wife picks them up for me all over town, and I always have enough, and when they start to rust, I throw them away. These are hackle stems, ginger hackle stems. I strip the hackle off, throw them in my big stacker to even up all the butt sections, and wind them up with some tying thread, and I dye this whole mess, and they're all together. And I generally bundle them in gross lots, so that I know that in every bunch of these are 12 dozen hackle stems. So I have a pretty good idea. When I look in my supply and I see like 4 bunches, I know I'm in pretty good shape for a while. So it's just a little personal thing. And this is a paper towel that's been saturated with water. When you tie with hackle stems, you want to use a paper towel, get it sopping wet, and flop this thing over. And as you need these stems, pull them out, cut them off the main bulk, and then flop this thing back over and keep the stems nice and moist, and they'll wind on real easy. Here's one of my red quill dry flies with that hackle stem reddish brown dye to makes a real pretty fly.
What about the height of the wings?
I beg your pardon?
How about the height of the wings in comparison?
That
to
varies
the size of
from
the
east to west, really. The eastern people used to like to dress the dressable portion of the shank. The west, tying the same fly, would make the wing the length of the entire hoof, including the back of the bend. So it's a matter of personal preference. And I think individual tyers sometimes tie, and they don't know why they tie that way, they just tie that way. Because my dad did it, and his dad did it, and we never asked why, we just keep doing it that way. Good question. Handling some materials to make them manageable. Here are 2 pieces of calf skin. This one is, all curly, and can you imagine the problem stacking this sucker? Terrible. This was the backbone here, and I cut this off. I soaked this in very hot water, put it on a piece of plywood, combed it until the hair was nice and straight. After it was partially dry, I put some paper towel over it, and put some weight to keep them in that shape. So that then when I use this stuff, it comes off real nice, so when I'm tying calf hair wings, the hair is easy to handle. In fact, if you cut that skin into little 1/8 inch wide strips, you can just bend the hide and cut off a little section for a wing.
So you use the skin rather than the tail then?
Yeah, right.
The tail is kind of crinkly.
Yeah, and it's very time consuming.
Why do they ever, well, it doesn't make any difference.
Well,
Why?
again, Lee Wolf started it, and I guess it's what he had at hand, and then it became such a popular commercial pattern that to tie the crazy thing got to be a real hassle with a calf tail.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden calf hair came in. I walked through a Tandy store over in Missoula one day, and here's a calf hide with 1/3 black, 2/3 white hair. And I bought the whole thing for like $18, and I've been tying on it ever since. And I wouldn't even want to guess how many flies I've tied. At the base of the wings, to hold these bunches together for a little better visibility, I run about 3 to 4 wraps around each base. And this requires a very light touch, because if you pull too hard, they want to flare and go every which way. So it's firm but not tight with the tension of your thread. And again, you want to pull that wing up after it's tied on as tight and as strong as you can to really get it set up there nice. This, I cut the butt sections off square, and I use the same thing that Dan Bailey used to use and still does, elk mane, and I cut it off square and I butt it right up against the butt section of the wing where the wings were cut square, so I don't have a lump or bump in there when I wind this. Okay, new tray here. Okay, elk hide. This is elk mane. Every year not every year, every couple of years, I ask someone to save me an elk mane, or I'll save my own. And I wash it in hot water, put it on a piece of plywood and stretch it, and then I comb it straight as an arrow. And then I take my stacker and I make little bundles, so that every time I tie a royal wolf, I don't have to stack every individual tail. Because one of these little bundles that you see here has enough hair in it to do maybe 3 to 4 dozen royal wolves. So you eliminated one operation, stacking a tail fight. Okay? This is the individual bundle. And they're all nice and even. Just stick your scissors in there, pull off as many as you want, and you got a tail. To tie the peacock in on a royal wolf, you get a nice looking job. If you tie it here and wind it there and tie it off, it won't look real nice. Some pieces of peacock have a heavy stem, and they're not going to wind nice regardless of what you do. You have to look for a piece of hurl with a relatively small stem and a nice size hurl. And you tie it in here over wet varnish, and you wind it to the rear and back again. Put your red bundle in here, tie the peacock in here, wind it back a little bit over the floss, bring it back through there again, tie it off. Notice the hackles, they're tied in, and notice where the stems are coming. I'm trying to keep this space here as close to that. You're not going to do it because you have more material tied in back there. But this stem tied up front helps out. The hackle again is wound pretty much the same way. As you come up there, there's a little bit of an angle on there. The photograph doesn't show it real well, but it gives you a pretty full wrap. And the color of tying thread, like I say, I like colors that sort of blend into the fly. I've been using a dark brown for the royal wolves, and I just kind of like the way it looks like. I've saved it. If you're going to tie a house and lot, basically the same operation. You've got, calf, you've got some peacock quill. I varnish this. I tie my royal wolves, house and lots, Ausable wolves with everything on except the hackle. I'll put a little drop of varnish at the base of the wings to hold them there. On house and lots, I'll varnish this section in here so it doesn't break as easily. And when it's dry, the next day I come in and I just wind hackles all day, for as many as I have to tie. This is one of my favorite flies if I'm going to use a whiteling. It's an Ausable wolf. It's got a dub body, which is much more durable and does a better job of floating a fly than peacock and red floss does. A lot of my customers, I change them over by sending them a complimentary half dozen of these with their royal wolves. Then I see the next time they order, they don't even order royal wolves, they order Ausable wolves. And this is how you have to teach sometimes. I mean, they'll go out someday and they'll find out, hey, this thing floats better, it catches fish just as well, I can see it as well because of the white wings, and it doesn't fall apart as quick.
That's brown and grizzly. And
yeah, brown and good hackle combination, And I use a bright red tying thread up front.
What dubbing is it?
It's Australian possum belly.
Oh.
That's not too hard to come up with. I know there's a lot of shops here. That's what the pattern calls for. Okay, this is going on to another fly, so we'll just skip that for right now and we'll tie something here. So,
Before the royal wolves become obsolescent, do you use a single piece of curl or several strands?
I use a single strand. I'm going to tie one right now. Tie one right now. There are a couple things I do a little bit different on tying. I don't know if you noticed in the pictures or not, but did you notice the first sequences of the Royal Wolf were tied with white thread? Or didn't you notice that? Didn't notice that, huh? Well, I have a reason for that. I kind of feel that the white thread doesn't look ugly under if it shows someplace. If you have black wrapped around the base of the wings and it shows, it doesn't look very nice. You know, and it just is a cosmetic type of thing. A lot of things you do or I do are done. There it is. It's done for cosmetic purposes. I want my flies to look as nice as I can, like there's some thought that has gone into building them. And so we use white for one operation, and we use, I've been real neat up to a point here, haven't I? Up to a point. Okay, and some brown. I finished the fly off with the brown. I use it just for tying the hackles in.
Do you have any trick for using floss? Do you have
Yeah, sure do. You watch and you'll see it here.
I have a heck of a time. Gets all kind of spread out over the whole shank.
Okay.
Oh, it gets the easiest snag and stuff. Then it end up with a fuzzy fly. You know?
Okay, you see how straight and nice that calf hair is? That's because, like I say, if it was in hot water, and you can either bend this thing or pull up a little bunch of it. Snip that off. My tools get exceedingly harder to find as I go along. They're camouflaged in with everything else. I find when I tie at home, I'm usually tying one pattern. If some of you ever tie commercially or ever have the idea that you might, I'll give you a little tip. What you do is I may take 10 customers that want their flies on April 15th, and I'll put all their orders together, and I'll go down and make a recap sheet so that this guy wants, a dozen Royal Wolf 12, dozen Royal Wolf 14s. So I put them down. And then I get Joe Blow next, and I put a star by his name, and he wants a dozen of 16 Royal Wolves. So I put a little star by Royal Wolf 12 16s, little line. Next guy wants only a half a dozen number 10s. So I'll put a check mark by his name. I'll come down and put a check mark by Royal Wolves, put 6 number 10s. So that when I'm all done, I'll take all 10 guys, or if I have 12 guys, or however many for that time, and I'll add up. And it's surprising because sometimes I'll go 2-3 days straight tying the same fly. And it makes it nice. And what I do is I'll go down the list, and I have the first guy, all his flies are up in the first part, and I'll draw a dividing line. I'll put the next guy and all his flies, so that when I get down to the bottom of the list, I mail his order out immediately. And I've got a good start on the next guy's bunch of flies, because I've already tied some up here and for down here and down here and down here. So it's a little technique that really, helps your tying out, and it manages your time a little better.
Are you the exclusive tire for Troth custom flies?
The
Exclusive flyer.
The only. Let me get the right size.
If you're tying like the Royal Wolves for the week, in X number in different sizes, do you work in a specific order of sizes, like from the biggest to the smallest, or the smallest to the biggest?
Yeah, I do. You know what I do? I start off with the smallest and end up with the biggest, because I like my day to get easier instead of tougher. Okay? Make sense?
Yeah.
Sure it does.
I'm exactly the opposite.
always
I try the biggest, so
That's to practice more.
We wanna
Right.
try the same
Yeah, but
fly for
changing
3 days.
sizes can be a real bugger.
Well, don't forget though, after you've been,
I've done that.
I've got
You've
tape
done it
on it.
for
I
a
get another
while.
book. But after you've been tying for a while,
That doesn't.
these different flies aren't going to be a challenge anymore because you've tied enough of them that you know you're not going to have any problems. Just another fly, another day, you know. So let's do it so we come out even here. Here's some tail material I'm going to have to go through. Okay. I tie this on a regular shank hook because there's more dressing that goes on here. And I'll start off with white tying thread, I think, yep. And, wait a minute here, something's wrong. I heard something pop. Okay, there it is. Where you put the wings. Sometimes I get the wings too close to the eye of the hook and I don't like it. I like them back a little bit further. If you were to divide your hook shank off into thirds, I like to put my wings usually on the front third. That's just a peculiarity that I had in my time. I like the way it looks. I like the way the flies balance. You know, it's how nice that little stacker stacked all those little hairs in that thing. The wings, like I say, Western, usually the length of the hook or the length of the dressable portion of the shank. The back end, while I have my fingers on them, that's a good time to cut them off square. Don't be afraid to move the hair around. You know, if it slides cockeyed on your hook, just grab it and straighten it out where you want it. And pull everything back, and a little dam of tying thread up in front. This won't hurt because, remember what I was saying, you're going to try to keep the diameter of the shank pretty much the same. Any fibers that stick out that you don't like, and you're already going to get a couple that slide around too far, just cut them off. And open this thing up so that you have about 50-50 on your wings. This is, you know, this is just a...
Are you going to use your little, whatchamacallit now?
What's that?
Oh no, this is a hair wing though, isn't it?
Drop that down a little bit. Now here,
You
this,
just wrap around the
yeah,
stems
here,
instead of
this,
using a whole.
this pressure is just firm, but it's not tight, okay? I've gone 3 turns around that one. And this wing usually is a little bit easier. Okay? Now, there's the wings done. Now, they're not cocked properly, see? This is what I was telling you about. You know, don't be afraid to grab these things and get them up into position. If you dampen your finger, and I mean, I pulled really hard, and you know something? They stand up real nice. They're right where they should be. So when I'm done, I'll put a little shot of varnish in there, and they're going to stay there. Now, my tail fibers, they're already stacked, so I don't have to fool around with that, and I can just pick out the amount that I want for a tail. Most of your royal wolves on the bigger size are whitewater flies, so I generally might tie in.
You make a long tail on those, I noticed.
Well, I make the tail as long as the entire hook. See, and if you get used to using your hook for proportions.
Well, I usually use a hook, a gauge width is what I've always, you know.
But
Right.
you know, it's so much easier just to hold that thing there.
Yeah.
And say, okay, that's where you want them.
But isn't it longer?
Well, no. You have a bend on the hook. I don't know. Can you see that from there? How's the tail look in relationship to everything else?
Well, it looks fine.
See, that's the length of the entire hook. Like I say, if I take here, the entire hook is roughly 13.5 millimeters, and my tail is 13.5 millimeters. So for the entire hook length, I'm exactly the same. Okay. Now I have like I say, I butted that square part up against one and the other up against the other, so that now I have a set of wrappings, so that when I wrap on here, I'm going to have an easy job of it because we're going to have pretty much the same diameter. For looking for, like I was telling you, you're going to find out that some peacock down near the base of it has a funny stem, and it doesn't wind real nice. And you start looking around, you'll find different fibers, and some of it wraps real nice, and some of it, I'm trying to find some that doesn't, so I can. This one would be a bad one. Pass that around and take a look at it. See, that one wouldn't wrap very nice at all.
You know, I find that too. Sometimes I'll wrap from the other end. Or is that too weak, do you think?
I find they break a lot. And I try to wind. Now watch, I'm going to wrap this to the rear, 3 turns, and I'm going to come right back through itself, 4 turns, and then I'm going to tie another bunch in for the front end, another piece of peacock curl. You were wondering about the floss.
Yeah, how you deal with your floss. Now you just use.
Now here I'm gonna one single strand. I'm gonna double it. That's how I handle it right there. I moisten
You
it.
wet it.
And it'll come right back. You'll never know it's been moistened after it's all done. And what that does, it allows you not to have it catch on your fingers and fray all out. And as you wind it, I watch so I don't put a twist into it.
Right.
So I wind it nice and flat. Okay. But I tie so many of these crazy things. I just, of course, I'm trying to wean some of the people off of them because I feel that there are better flies, more durable flies. I know it's gained popularity because I can find an old 70-year-old lady down the street and I said, "What do you know about fishing?" She says, "Nothing." I said, "Name me a trout fly." She'll say, "Royal Wolf." I mean, everybody knows what a royal wolf is. You know, you see a television thing on there, and the guy says to the lady, "What are you using?" "I'm using a royal wolf." You know, that's royal wolf. I mean, you can't get away from it. And if they like it, and you're going to try to make your living tying flies, you better learn how to tie it. Because somewhere along the line, you're going to tie more than your share.
Do you have any specific thing you prefer? You peel off the bottoms. You don't cut them off.
No.
No.
Like I
Is
say,
that a speed
I've read
thing, or?
all this stuff that you're asking me, you know, about cutting them off because they tie in, they're stronger that way and everything else.
Well, yeah.
And I think a bunch of it is a pile of crap, really. And what I do when I tie these in now, I leave bare shank with no fibers on, sticking out, so that when I turn this hackle for the first turn, it's not going to lay on hackles until it gets somewhere down in here. You follow what I'm saying? Okay. Now, I'll wind this up in front, back, and front, and I'm going to cut these hackle stems off so they're
right behind the eye.
Right behind the eye, and that way I'm going to get I'll get a nice, pretty even, you know, platform to wind all this crap on. In fact, I'm supposed to be using my brown thread. I got to talking. That's my main problem. There we go. I'll put my brown thread on now. No, here, take the white one off. Okay, here. Back and forth in front of that, and that'll sort of even that out a little bit, okay? I'm ready to wrap my first hackle on. Hackle pliers.
Right off your white card.
There we go. Boy. Things sort of disappear. And I always put a little shot of varnish on here and into the base of the wings because I kind of feel that, you know, after that hardens up, it'll make it a lot tougher. Okay. Now, you see where the first hackles are starting to pop out? And lower half, okay? Now, I'm gonna try to get an angle started here so that I'm laying these hackles on. And watch you don't put a twist into your hackle pliers because then you can either break a stem real easy or start to get hackles going, individual fibers going in every direction that you don't want them to go into. Okay, one fiber down. I've been putting 2 hackles on everything from 10 to 16, or 10 to 14. I put 2 hackles on. When I tie 16s and I'm gauging hackles and I'm getting a bunch of them, Yeah.